In this breaking weather update, I'm going to be covering the latest with tropical woes at the coast, with tropical storm force warnings up for the mid-Atlantic from portions of North Carolina up towards Delaware. I have all the details on what's going to become subtropical or tropical storm Ophelia coming up in this video. Alright, thank you so much for joining me here at One Nation Weather. Let's go ahead and get into these tropical storm force impacts that are going to be coming. We've been talking about this weird storm for several days now, but it's finally come to life, and we're seeing the chance about 50 to 60% for tropical storm force winds to especially push onto the Outer Banks, but heading all the way on up towards portions of the Long Island coastline is where we could at least see some tropical storm force. Remember, sustained winds is what we're looking at here. The gusts will be even higher, with a warning up along that coastline, as a tropical storm is expected to make landfall sometime between Friday night and into our Saturday. So let's time this storm out right off the gate for us here. You can see we've got very heavy rain offshore, but overall most of this activity staying offshore over the course of the next 6 to 12 hours as I'm filming this. It's once we get into the middle of the night tonight when this really begins starting to hit portions of the North Carolina coastline. Notice most of the South Carolina coastline getting spared, at least initially, from the heaviest rain, and that will honestly be how this is throughout the event. But if you live really from portions of central North Carolina eastward, that's where we're going to see some of these heavy rain bands. Notice how these try to spread inland towards Raleigh, but places like Greenville, North Carolina, Jacksonville, we've got these areas that have been hard hit by hurricanes like Florence in the past. This is definitely not a Florence, but we're at least seeing some very heavy rain as well as some winds pushing on shore with this system, especially as we go late Friday evening and into our Saturday. Notice here we're seeing that wraparound flow heading on in from the north, and we get these bands pushing on in from the east, and within these bands there's a little bit of rotation. I certainly wouldn't rule out a brief spin-up tornado along the mid-Atlantic coastline, and I think the models are honestly showing this going a little bit further west than I would have imagined with this system, so I don't really think these impacts are going to necessarily make it as far west in Virginia and North Carolina as they're showing here. But nonetheless, we're looking at the potential for some of that rain to certainly hit the coastline in very heavy fashion for us. This is 3, 4, 5 a.m. heading all the way on towards your breakfast time on your Sunday for us here, or excuse me, your Saturday, and we're looking at very heavy rain pushing on now up towards portions of Long Island, as well as just the downpours right off the coast for us here into places like Atlantic City, New Jersey. This is going to be skirting on, and you can really just see how strong this system is. Again, not an eye forming. This is not a hurricane by any stretch of the imagination, but at least we're looking at the system continuing to push on off towards the northeast and really bringing those moderate impacts continuing along the east coast, even as this heads up towards Maine, with some very heavy rain pushing into Massachusetts as well. So let's time out these wind gusts for us here. They're going to be making their way on up towards 30 miles per hour to 40 along the North Carolina coastline. You can see some of these 40 mile per hour wind gusts that my cursor is going over just offshore as you're waking up on your Friday morning. So the last day of the work week, and we're going to have some unpleasant conditions settling on in. Some 20 mile per hour wind gusts going further inland. Notice how we get a little bit more of an enhanced circulation to get going by the time we head towards your evening commute. And in portions of eastern North Carolina, as well as all the way on up towards the Delmarva area, we're looking at the potential for some wind gusts to now be getting 40 to maybe even 50 miles per hour by the time we're heading into your Friday afternoon, with 20 mile per hour wind gusts heading all the way on up towards New York City. And then this is really when the winds are going to peak as you go into your your Friday night into your Saturday. This is when the storm will have been over the waters for the longest time, getting ready to make a landfall somewhere likely along the North Carolina coastline with a wide swath of 30 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts, with some up to 60 pushing on up towards the north. And look how the wind gusts don't really stop there. You can see how these really continue all the way on up into portions of New Jersey with several hours of wind gusts above 30 miles per hour. And we'll continue to see these 20 to 30 mile per hour wind gusts progress all the way on up into places like Massachusetts, the Boston area being included in that mixture. Now, the chance for tropical storm force winds and the timing of it, again, this is really pushing towards around Friday in the evening when the worst of these sustained winds are going to be hitting into the North Carolina Outer Banks. If you get these tropical storm force winds further north, the chances are pretty low for at least sustained tropical storm force winds, but the timing of those gusts is a little bit earlier than this. But nonetheless, as we go into our Saturday, that's when these winds are really going to get howling here along the the mid-Atlantic and heading towards the northeastern coastline. So here's our flooding potentials as we go towards your Friday and Saturday. A level 2 flood risk from the Grand Strand of South Carolina all the way on up to far southern New Jersey for us there, and we see that stretch all the way along that coastline. Very similar look to your flood risk on your Saturday, just shifting northeastward as we see this go from portions of central North Carolina up to the Cape Cod region now as those heavier rain bands. What the models have been showing with this system is this one heavy rain band on the northeastern side of this storm, pushing potentially some thunderstorms, some very heavy rainfall on up into the Cape Cod region. If that were to happen, this could be actually where we see some of the heaviest rain totals of this event, so I would certainly monitor this closely. Here's a look at the expected rain totals from all of the models really combined into the Weather Prediction Center's outlook for us. Over the next 120 hours, this is the next 5 days. All of this along the coastline is from basically what Ophelia is going to be doing. You can see anywhere in those red colors is where you're looking at about 2 inches or more of rain. This encompasses eastern North Carolina, most of eastern Virginia, going on up into eastern Maryland, eastern PA, southern New York, and heading on all the way basically through all of Massachusetts. Some of those yellow totals heading on up into the mid-Atlantic is where we could see up to 6 inches of rain. So let's look at some of these locally zoomed rainfall totals from places like Jacksonville, North Carolina, heading on up towards Greenville, North Carolina, as well as all the way on up there towards some Virginia Beach, Virginia. We're looking at the potential for some of those rain totals to be in that 3 to 5 inch range for us. So certainly be ready for some of the flooding on the roadways, and I wouldn't be shocked if our flood risk gets upgraded in this region especially. Now let's take the local zoom on up towards Maryland, the Washington, D.C. region, heading on over towards the coast there of Delaware. Overall, looking at about 2 to 4 inches of rain is the consensus in this region, but wouldn't be shocked if in some of those yellow areas that you're seeing, or in any of these areas around it. Remember, this is not set in stone completely. That's where I'd watch out for the potential of up to 5 inches of rain. And then let's take one more local zoom look, heading on up towards Long Island over to Cape Cod. Overall, the consensus with the models is more towards 2 to 3 inches there. But if that heavy rain band, you can see some of those lighter reds heading towards that, that kind of that tannish shade just offshore. That's where I'd watch out for maybe the 3 to 4 inch totals to try and arise and head onshore, and I certainly think that we will see some 3 to 4 inch totals head towards the Boston area. So here's the headlines with Ophelia. Ophelia developing off the North Carolina coast. Rip currents, gusty winds, and heavy rainfall are the main threats with this weird system as it pushes onshore into the mid-Atlantic into Friday night and Saturday. Impacts will head up the east coast and into the Washington, D.C. area and towards New England with this storm. Peak wind gusts will be 40 to 60 miles per hour for most hard-hit areas. Locations from the far northeastern tip of South Carolina to the New England states should prepare for not necessarily crazy weather, but certainly messy conditions as the wind and rain pushes through. The wind will persist through the weekend as this system continues to push on off towards the north. Rain will arguably be the highest concern. Prepare for 2 to 4 inches of rain from the Outer Banks to Cape Cod, with the chance for 1 or 2 areas to locally pick up half a foot of rainfall, especially there in the North Carolina, Virginia, or heading on up into the Delmarva coastline. A slight flooding risk is in play for 24 plus hours as Ophelia moves through your community. So if you live along the East Coast, really be ready for this from the Carolinas all the way on up to even the coast of Maine, at least seeing some of the rain impacts from this. Not so much the wind as far north as there, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and like and subscribe, and here are the credits.